Good morning, comrades. So it is Tuesday. You are listening to 102.3 WHIVLP New Orleans. You can also listen to us anywhere in the world at WHIVFM.org/listen. Check us out on Facebook. Good morning, comrade. Twitter at Comrade Morning. And all the other stuff. Good morning, comrade. Good morning, comrades.
Good morning.
How we doing?
Hi.
Got Jeff in the studio.
We got Scott.
I'm Erin.
And I'm Robert.
So what's going on, folks? How we doing?
What is everybody been up to? I have to brag again, and my attempts to turn this into the video game podcast.
Oh, here we go again. Here we go again.
And I have to say this because it's public. I pirated last night the sequel to Rebel Galaxy, which is Rebel Galaxy Outlaw. And I promise that I will eventually buy this game. It is coming to the Switch as well, but it's on PC right now. And I love space games, and I always just want to live the space trucker life.
Space trucker.
This game does it perfectly there, and so it's like it's got all this country music, and it's set in like a galaxy that's been named after like Texas cities, because I think that the developers are from Texas, and they're really cool. Whatever, you're like a space lady trying to get space revenge, hauling around space ore.
See ya, space cowboy.
Yeah, that's exactly what the game is. It is
Cowboy Bebop.
Cowboy Bebop, the game, and I got in the game there's a fake store that's called Buckshots, and they have an armadillo as their mascot, and the color scheme and everything. It's Space Buc-ee's.
It's Buc-ee's? Okay, so what is Buc-ee's? I don't even know what Buc-ee's is.
Buc-ee's is something you can only see in Texas. I know because driving to San Antonio, it's right there before you get in the city limits, and it's got
100 signs.
It's got everything. They bag their own candy. It's got the cleanest bathrooms you'll find on the road. It's just like the best. They cook all this food and stuff.
We're not doing an advertisement.
Fun fact.
Buc-ee's, hit us up. Give me some Buc-ee bites.
I have a Buc-ee's tote bag that I use for work so that people think I'm not a cop, because that happens a lot. So I'm trying to be more approachable.
So Buc-ee's is not cop?
Yeah,
Buc-ee's is not cop.
Buc-ee's clearly Antifa. It's an indicator.
I heard they're weird because they actually pay their employees $15 an hour. They've been doing that, but apparently like it's a hellish place to work. Oh. So I don't know. They're like, oh, we're paying you more.
You're gonna earn that $15 an hour, maggot.
Right. That's their whole thing. That's what I read. But yeah, I got you that Buc-ee's tote bag because the one time that I went to Buc-ee's was I was driving Uber, and it was a flood on I-10, so all the a lot of the highways were closed, like I-10, like in parts were shut down. You had to go around, and so I picked up these two kids from Rice, which is the college in Houston, and they were like they were at the Greyhound bus station. Like, all the Greyhounds are not driving to Houston. Can you take us to Houston? I was like, I'm up for an adventure. Let's go. Yeah. So I drove all the way out to Houston and all the way back. Like, Uber shut off. I got like $800 for the ride.
Nice.
I know you think that's a lot, but then you don't get anything going back, obviously. It was like an 8-hour trip.
I mean, still.
I know, but like, but I made it my main thing. I'm like, okay, I'm already out here.
Wait,
I'm
Houston to San Antonio in 8 hours?
Houston to here.
Oh, gotcha.
From New Orleans.
I gotcha. I love it.
And I drove, and I was like, okay, I'm stopping at Buc-ee's. And I did. I got a Buc-ee's t-shirt, a Buc-ee's wine glass, and Aaron's tote bag.
Did you spend all of the $800 at Buc-ee's?
No, it was a really nice place, though. Like, if you've been, I mean, I think it gets overrated a little bit, and obviously, you know, they're moving out of Texas. Not moving out, but
Buc-ee's overrated. You heard it here, folks.
They're expanding past Texas. There's going to be Buc-ee's. There's one in Osceola, I think. They're like moving into Florida, and there's going to be one in Baton Rouge. And I know there's going to be one, I think, in Orange Beach.
I mean, I know there's an In-N-Out in San Antonio now.
I mean, but if you've been to like a legitimate truck stop, it's really no different. But it's just the idea of like having a huge truck stop in a place that's not a truck stop, because they actually will not. You can't be a truck and gas up there. You only cars can gas up, only passenger vehicles. So it's the idea of like having the nicest, cleanest truck stop in places where truck stops aren't. If that makes any sense, that's why people rave over them. And their mascot is like really cool.
So where will you be when the impending Bucky's Wawa war eventually comes and just smacks
It's like
down
you read my mind.
and wreaks havoc over the eastern seaboard of America?
Because, Wawa is, like, I don't even really understand why we're talking about Bucky's, because Wawa is the be-all, end-all, and I will literally fight anybody on that one.
We have a Wawa party
And
now.
also, Sheetz is trash.
I mean, you might as well.
Sheetz is straight trash. It's trash.
They're not even on the same tier though. Like Loves and
Aaron,
Flying J and all that. They're not even like Sheets. It's not even the same tier.
Aaron, could you drop your email so we don't get all these bad emails?
Oh, I'm here for the smoke.
Her email
I am
is contact
here for
at
that
good
Wawa
mo-
smoke.
Her email is contact@goodmorningcomrade.com.
If anybody disagrees with this, you're just dumb. It's just that, I mean, I'll just say it. Like, Wawa's has the best quick service, but Bucky's is objectively the better store.
Oh, no. And y'all are getting married?
No, Bucky's it's like a tourist trap. To where, like, Wawa is a place that will sustain you. They're not the same.
I mean, Bucky's is an oasis. One time I drove from Biloxi to San Antonio without going to the bathroom, and I had to stop at Bucky's. Like, I just had my mind.
You know, I saw the last time I drove to Florida.
You're burying the lead here. Hold on. You went all the way from Biloxi to San Antonio without going to the bathroom?
That's insane.
I had to do it.
Last time I was, I can't tell you where, but it was like near Tallahassee in the Panhandle. Actually, last time I drove to Florida was for the when I was on the DNC platform committee in Orlando in 2016, and there's a sign that says clean bathrooms like 600 miles away in Tallahassee for Bucky's. It's like, Bucky's, you got that much money to burn to do memes? Like, that's what kind of company? Like, that's who needs to be investigated. Bernie Sanders, like, get on that, because obviously this company has too much money.
Bucky's
where they can just burn cash.
Bucky's just trash.
Bucky is the millionaires and the billionaires.
Bucky's just trash posting all over the interstate.
So, kind of bizarro world Bucky's, if you all have ever been there, is something called South of the Border, which is on the border of North Carolina and South Carolina.
Isn't that like a theme park?
Yeah, and it's the single most racist place I've ever been, and I've been
Tell me about
to
it.
a lot of racist places.
I've heard about it.
The mascot is Pedro, and so for starting about a solid 500 miles away, there's just every 10 to 15 miles billboards of Pedro, who is a like a very racist Mexican caricature. Like, just, I can't even really describe.
He's wearing Gonzalez.
Basically, that's exactly. And just like puns that are like racial. And you can buy fireworks there, and it's the single most bizarre place I've ever been. And it's like the opposite of the meme of like that meme that's what this is the world that liberals want. It's like the literal opposite.
Racist one.
Yes.
What is the most racist place that everybody's been to?
Ooh.
Like, I think that's a good question.
Yeah.
What is the most racist place?
I mean, we're from Chalmette. That's not fair.
Like,
Is it not fair?
I mean, I don't mean like some backwater town. Like
We're gonna get
a
some
place
hate mail
that's
for that
set
one.
up to like a tourist trap, or like you're like, how does this exist? How is this a thing?
I don't know. I've never
trying to
been
think.
much for tourist traps, I guess. I don't know. I'd have to think about that. I have been to the city of Philadelphia.
Okay.
Oh no.
Okay. All right.
That was a joke.
All
That was a joke.
right.
Here it is.
I mean, if y'all couldn't tell from my Wawa love, we can fight about Philly later. But
I actually loved Philly, and it was great.
Philly's we'll talk about it later. I love Philly. Probably the most racist place I've ever been was Monticello. Thomas
that's
Jefferson.
pretty rough, yeah.
And not even because it's like you go in and you know what it is, but just like how dismissive, like, and how little kind of the aspects of Thomas Jefferson owning people for domestic work
And also fathering children of the domestic,
Yeah.
like of Sally Hemings specifically,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, there was a lot of emphasis on, well, there were slaves, but there were also indentured servants from Ireland, so it's totally fine.
Oh, can we talk about Italians and racism against Italians actually now?
Yeah, that's not a bad idea. Like I duck that whole like Cuomo thing. So anything you say about that is going to be first time for me. So I'd love to hear about it.
It's he basically said saying
How did it start?
I don't remember that. I just saw the video where he's like on his phone recording himself, and somebody called him Fredo, and he's like, "Oh, calling an Italian person Fredo is like calling someone the N word."
Which feels inaccurate to me.
It's not accurate.
Yeah,
at all.
NYC Guido voice, you're oppressed. On Twitter. Y'all know what I'm talking about, though.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It was just a real bad take that somebody got on camera.
Yeah, but it's this weird victim, because I'm Irish American,
Irish
and
people
it's
got it
very
bad.
similar. It's like this idea that because people were persecuted when they first came here, that they still are kind of the that magical beneficiary of marginalization. The idea that we can't be racist because people are racist against us, or we can't be oppressive because we are oppressed. It's like this very, very bizarre dichotomy. Like, Irish people aren't the single whitest people.
Well, I was at a weird time to be in Louisiana history when I was coming up, because all that stuff was kind of coming around, all the revisionist history. Like, I remember we were reading about, I think maybe it was our textbooks, it was like, oh, Irish people, they had it just as bad or something like that. Or I don't know, it was that, or that some teacher told me that or something like that.
So, and it's not even to say that, because especially during the 19th century and through these times, there were these groups that were viewed in a lot of the ways that we would view sort of Mexican or Guatemalan or Central and South American people that are coming to the border, who are coming in here and sort of taking the work away from the people who are there. And that's sort of the ruling class's vision of well, what are y'all doing? It's basically talking to the, whatever, mix of people that are there, a lot of waspy types.
Yeah.
And saying, well, they're coming and taking your jobs, and just sort of using this, using these, completely irrelevant differences and anything other than they're the other, just using xenophobia to divide working class people. And there was sort of a process of assimilation into sort of the default, which is kind of like whiteness in the US, right?
Yeah.
And so one by one, the Irish and the Italians and all these other various groups sort of became de facto white, just based off of either cultural assimilation and then later also legal definitions of these sorts of things, which mattered a lot more in the sort of specific, explicit legal sense than they do now.
I remember
there's a lot of other legal workarounds that are being used to sort of marginalize people in terms of where you were born. If you're born in not in the U.S., that's sort of supposed to matter now as to whether or not you get basic rights in the U.S.
Yeah. Well, so that's one of the things that I think is super interesting, just how fluid the idea of race is, and how race has been used to keep people oppressed for so long, and the definition changes. I remember learning about, because I've always wondered about this idea that, are you white, and are you white Hispanic or white non-Hispanic?
What kind of white
And
are you?
I always wondered kind of why that is a thing. And I remember I saw a PBS documentary. Apparently, Mexican people used to be considered, Mexican and Hispanic used to be a different race, but it was specifically, they were talking about Mexicans in this ruling. They were classified as white just so they could legally have an all-white jury for Hispanic people in Texas.
Yeah, it's not shocking at all. So
Yeah.
it's how you use it, however best it fits you for what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
So essentially, it's not even a Rorschach test, because Rorschach tests are completely removed from any kind of utility. They're basically just perceptual, right? But in terms of whether you can use a Rorschach crowbar to achieve some kind of a goal,
Yeah.
a Rorschach tool.
Yeah, it's why I wish intersectionality was taught in schools. It's so important, and it's become this weird buzzword. for social justice warriors, I think it's, people consider it to be something silly and not real, but in reality, it's, it's this idea of like trying to rank oppression, or because you're oppressed in kind of one of your identities, that you can't be oppressive in another. I mean, I'm a white woman, and, I have been oppressed in ways because of my female identity, my gender identity, but then I've also am white and, can't come from a pretty wealthy family. And so I've been oppressive in those ways. And it's like this weird thing, like my
Before you go on, first off, can I do a quick station idea? And I don't mean to interrupt, but I also want to just sort of rewind a little bit and then sort of dilate on what is intersectionality for people who in the audience who might not be listening.
Sure.
But first off, you're listening to WHIV LP New Orleans 102.3, WHIV FM. Sorry to interrupt, but go on ahead. What is intersectionality?
I was just talking about how I wish it was taught in schools, and then moved forward,
No.
like without explaining. So intersectionality is the idea that every person has multiple different identities. So like I was saying, I am female, I am white, I am upper middle class, or I used to be before I decided to be a social worker. I grew up Christian. These are all kind of facets of my identity. And, the idea of intersectionality is that you can be oppressed, like I said, in some aspects, and oppressive in others. So you can be part of the majority or the minority, depending on kind of how you identify.
So if you look at like a Venn diagram of
Yeah.
like multiple things, like is it like race, gender, socioeconomic, like wealthy perhaps.
Yeah, health and disability.
Yeah, and sort of like where they sort of all cross over.
Yeah.
Or in the various parts. That's sort of like that's how I sort of, because I'm a 4th and 5th grade teacher and I use a lot of Venn diagrams. That's the way I sort of see it in my brain.
Yeah. And I mean, taking it back to kind of previous conversations we've had, it can be difficult because when you're trying to include everybody's we all have a million different identities, and there's a million different combinations of identities. And so if you're trying to accommodate everybody, it makes things hard. It's hard to make decisions. It's hard to have plans that include everybody. It's hard to have your social movement include every single aspect. For instance, there's that joke, the white feminism. And it's this idea that feminism is often white women often co-opt it and are talking about things that, affect white women specifically. Whereas because other women might have different identities than racial identities, so white, so people who are people of color, also women who are cis or trans, so that means being born in the gender, your correct gender, economics and things. So it's like the kind of the feminism that's been getting pushed pretty frequently has been an upper middle class to upper class white feminism.
And they'll use the language that you just articulated, which does have a lot of merit in various ways, to sort of push their own, that push sort of like the, yes, slay queen, vote
Yes,
for Hillary, or you're
absolutely.
sexist,
Yeah.
racist, whatever line. And like, I'm totally oversimplifying here, but the co-option of sort of like the language of social justice, I suppose is the best way to put it. I'm not exactly sure,
It's the
but
co-option,
it's
yeah.
co-opted by the ruling class for the ends of the ruling class against the working class, and the language of intersectionality can be used just as it is to sort of like make space for various identities within a conversation to divide the entire working class, and that's sort of like where the left sort of like gets in huge fights with itself over this kind of language.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it is hard. And, I probably will say this every episode, like the social justice and kind of working to help people is messy. It's hard. When you do want to include the most people, it's hard. You have to have more better plans. You have to have more inventive plans. You have to be aware of way more factors than if you're only thinking about one specific group.
That reminds me a lot about some of the stuff that recently happened. It's about 2 weeks ago now, as of probably the release of this. But the DSA convention happened recently, and there was some people took about 90 seconds of the entire DSA convention on video, just showing people, using the American Sign Language signs for applause, which is basically just like waving your hands in the air. And they had a couple of people who would take the microphone, and they would say certain things like, using terms like guys, which I do all the time, it like erases sort of like people who might be non-binary, which is
who were the people saying this? Who were the people coming out? Like,
you mean the people saying this at the microphone, or
the people who are like, you guys are saying guys, and that excludes people. Like, who were they?
So before I get to that, I do want to just sort of stipulate that part of the reason any of this was even happening was because there were like very direct and very agreed upon community agreements for the DSA convention to make that kind of space for the people that were there. So it wasn't, and a lot of the people like you were just sort of alluding to just a moment ago, who were literally Tucker Carlson and his white supremacist TV show had on, well, I don't want to mention her. She had on somebody who calls herself a leftist to talk about like how ridiculous it was to
mention them. Nobody's listening anyway.
I don't want to give him the shine. I don't want to give him the GMC bump, if you know what I mean. But anyway, they had this person on to talk about like the disarray that the DSA was in after the convention because of these things. And like honestly, if you had no idea about the sort of like length to which they went to do inclusion, I guess it could look a little bit weird. But I guess maybe if you think about it for like 5 seconds, it becomes less so. So anyway,
I was going to say
different rant.
Two things to say about that. First one is that, that's why I was like, I wasn't grilling you. It's like, who are these people? Because I had a feeling in the back of my head. I kind of haven't delved into that, but I had a feeling these were bad faith actors. And yeah, if you're going to sit up on Tucker Carlson show and talk about gender neutral pronouns on Fox, you're probably a bad faith actor. Second of all, that the DSA convention's getting talked about on Fox News, brand is strong. That's what that's telling me. Because I don't remember, for somebody who's watched Fox News before, I don't remember any DSA convention or anything DSA's ever done being covered by right-wing media in any context.
And it
that's a win.
To me, it says that like the fact that this is getting any kind of attention and being so like decontextualized because mostly because there was some very important things that were kind of passed in that convention rather, that included a multifaceted approach towards labor that I, full disclosure, was super behind and had a very tiny part in helping develop. And also, they were things sort of like there was a huge debate about regional organizations and a couple of other things like that were really set the trajectory for the next 2 years. And these conventions happen only once every 2 years, which is not very often for the national organization to convene. A lot of very important things were settled during this convention, but all that was talked about on specifically on Fox News and Tucker Carlson and a couple of other places, was look at them, they're waving their hands in the air so people don't get sad or whatever, and that's sort of like, that's what some people who are definitely not extremely shook do,
Yeah.
That's what you do if you're not like scared that this is an actual real thing and you're not worried about it ever making pressure on the comfortable cushy life that you have.
I think that that is one of the uphill struggles of being a leftist rather than someone who's more reactionary, is because you do care about other people's feelings. It's a lot easier to get meetings run when you don't care about offending people, when you don't care about including everybody's identities. And the thing is, they have a point. So language matters. Language, cognitive behavioral therapy is specifically the therapy that changes the way you view, the way you talk to yourself and the way you talk kind of about yourself, and it actually does change how you think about yourself and your brain. So these things are really important. Language matters. It inclusive language really matters. And at the same time, it's important to you have to pick your battles sometimes, and you have to meet people where they're at.
And I do want to push back, not against you, but like push back against the idea of like inclusive language being like the way that it can be, that kind of discourse that you just mentioned can be utilized to shut down conversation.
Absolutely,
which is why it's such a fraught thing. So it's very difficult sometimes in those sorts of situations to determine whether or not the person is coming at you in good faith. When you make a point and you might say something that is inappropriate or that might, unintentionally sort of like push somebody's buttons or offend them genuinely or whatever. And, somebody who's just like, well, look at you, your point's invalid because you called somebody, whatever, you said some kind of ableist slur, which, I try all the time to do better in terms of language that's not sort of like caustic in those ways. But at the same time, please just engage with the argument.
Yeah, absolutely.
In a lot of ways. That's sort of like where I lose my patience with those kinds of conversations.
Yeah. Well, yes. So we all have to remember that even though we are all in this room actively trying to dismantle these oppressive systems, or else we wouldn't be doing any of this. We've all grown up in a racist, sexist, ableist, classist, whatever-ist society.
We grew up in capitalism, which necessarily will kind of like take the already like the most powerful privileged forces within the society and push them down on everyone else.
Yeah, like we all have to actively work to unlearn the terrible things that we've grown up with, and not even because we have bad parents or because our schools are bad or anything like that. It's just, it's in the culture. It surrounds us. It seeps in. And so it's important that we try really hard. So try is the operative word. If someone tells you that language is offensive to them, obviously try not to use it. But also we all need to cut each other a little bit of slack, because when you're tired, when you've had a busy day, you might not always, it's like muscle memory. So saying I grew up in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, like you guys is a thing. Like I love y'all. I've started using y'all. Y'all is gender neutral. I love it. But sometimes I will revert back to you guys, because that is, I'm 32 years old, and for a solid and 20 something of those years I was saying you guys. And your intention isn't necessarily exclude people who would it's not my intention at all.
Women or other genders. Like intentionality matters.
Yeah, absolutely.
But also like intentionally going out of your way to use more inclusive language also matters. It's just that this is something that is so sort of like for in terms of, if you're using that to discredit a point that you're making, I think that's where it becomes a problem for me. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
And on the other side of it, I can see where it would become a huge problem if someone would sort of casually use language that would be a lot. You guys is not like aggressively like anti-NB language, non-binary language.
Oh, yeah.
Now, at least not my perception. But like,
yeah, I think
if somebody comes and like uses the R word, to talk about somebody who might be, have, a mental disability or whatever, that's different, right? And sort of like differentiating between these, distinctions is very important.
I don't know. I think you're working a little bit too hard to let yourself off the hook there.
I'm not. I don't use that word. What you saying? Like for saying you guys?
Yeah.
Like
you're like very cool with. You're being very cavalier about letting it go with yourself.
No,
what do you mean?
When this is this is where the left like falls on its face and like it's like the cartoon.
I don't even think that's a left thing. I think it's a liberal.
It is a liberal thing.
ruling class.
You're right. And I've just smashed into the mic because of like when people start getting super pedantic is when I just check out. Like when you're not making arguments, when somebody's making an argument in good faith, and we've had this conversation about race and class before. When somebody makes not even the best argument, but they're coming from a place of like, I don't want to do others harm and in good faith, then I'm completely okay with it. And I think this has a lot with, when we talk about race and class, like me being biracial, So there's just been a lot of stuff in my life, especially with like I have to deal with relatives who are outwardly racist, and then when they're in front of me, they correct their racism and be like, "Oh, sorry, Robert, I didn't mean you. You know how it is." And I have to like swallow that, and that might not be the best thing, but I have to be like, "Oh, Uncle Jim Bob, like he's all right. He comes from an all right place, but this is how I have to grade him." I say this all the time: I grade people on a curve. So it's like I take your whole body of work. And then if you say something dumb, like I've had to correct my mom before on stuff that's like on stuff that's race, and been like, "Mom, don't ever say that because somebody else."
What it means?
Yeah, if somebody else hears that, oh my, you're gonna be in for it. But like, I'm lucky I got to you. Like before you said this in front of. I hope you haven't said this in front of people. But it's just like grading people on a curve and like accepting them where they're at instead of being so. Well, you said this thing and you're canceled.
And at the same time, I agree with everything you've just said, but it is really important to remember that just because you think something's pedantic doesn't mean it's pedantic to somebody else.
That's
and
true.
you're great.
That's the point I was saying. Like we could pat ourselves on the back all we want, but we're still gonna say things that hurt people's feelings. Like,
Yeah.
Right, and when somebody will say something about that, like that doesn't necessarily take away the point that you're making. You can just say, "Excuse me, I didn't mean to do that," et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not saying be a jerk about it.
I mean, you seem pretty fed up about it.
No, because what I'm talking about is bad faith utilization of this kind of language to discredit an argument or a point or a position that you have, which happens so frequently. I mean, that was the entire 2016 campaign of Hillary Clinton.
Well, to be fair, I have not had. I don't think that the 90 seconds taken during the DSA was pedantic at all. I think it's such a big place, and I don't think it was bad faith. I don't think it was meant to shut anything down. And the people, again, I talk about this a lot. The people who are out there actually doing the work are a lot more. They at least in my experience have been a lot more relaxed about things like that. They understand that the world is messy. They understand that we are all flawed humans and that we're doing our best. It's been those keyboard warriors who have a lot of feelings and a lot of theories and a lot of imaginary praxis, I guess, that are the ones who are the quickest to correct you. It's like those tumblerinas is basically what it is. It's like,
So, you're listening to WHIVLP in New Orleans, 102.3. You can listen online at WHIV FM. Go on.
yeah, it's just, I've just noticed that people who are actually out there doing the work usually will be very polite. They'll, "Oh, hey, that language is, we don't like to use that language, and this is the reason why." And then they move on. It's the people who are, at home, they're on their keyboard, they aren't actually out there doing anything particularly helpful for anybody, who are the ones, policing each other. That's where the cancel culture comes in.
Cancel culture is not a thing. I don't believe in that at all. Like, the people that are on the internet, those are people that can't get out in the world in a lot of ways. Like, the internet is a great equalizer. People on the internet can't always make it out to things. Like, maybe they live in like Pawtucket, Kentucky, or something like that, some weird town we've never been to. Like, that's how they get on a discussion. Like, being on the internet, like, those people are trying to get on the discussion, but they can't be there. They can't be out there helping out as much as everybody else. Like, that, I think that's really important. Like, saying you're getting policed by these people is kind of weird because, like, just because they're not out there helping as much, like, maybe they have a job. I don't know. I just think it's
Organize your workplace.
I don't know. I just think it's weird to like just say like there's these people out there that are just like being real mean to us about their identities and stuff.
You're actually so right, and I'm now taking a step back, and that's not something I considered.
There are examples of people that I don't want to call out on the radio that I can point to of this, and I'll be happy to do so off the air. Anyway.
No, but there are a-holes everywhere, but I just really did use
it's certainly not
super broad stroke to just dismiss a lot of people, and that was not my intention. But this is why this is important, because I went into this conversation best of intentions and just inadvertently really dismissed a lot of people who are my allies.
So I'm going to go ahead and say in a real way though, the amount of people that are kind of using those kind of arguments that I mentioned are a very vocal minority. They're a very small amount of people that do that kind of thing, specifically for the bad faith reasons I'm talking about. I'm not saying it's a pervasive thing that's taking over the internet or taking over, whatever. But it's sort of something that's overrepresented by voice and also bolstered by sort of like right wing forces like Tucker Carlson, his white supremacist TV show.
I mean, that's his whole thing he does. He will try to co-opt ideas from the left, and he will use them on his show, and he'll twist them in a certain way. He's very prismatic. He's very prismatic in the way that he'll take a term and he'll turn it into a certain degree and just kind of twist it. He's very
See,
poisonous.
but that brings up a very valid. I was sitting here thinking about the in my world of I'm really into electoral politics and stuff like that, and cancel culture on the left is definitely a thing, and we're so ready to cancel each other out. And it might be a minority, it might be a loud vocal minority, but they still exist. The thing that gets me is, and I try to be as practical as possible, as pragmatic as possible. The right doesn't have a problem with this, and the example you just brought up of Tucker Carlson, who can sit here and say, you know what, millionaires and billionaires, and grift off of Bernie and be like, millionaires and billionaires are kind of bad and we should really tax them. He's not thrown out by the right because they see him as useful.
Yeah.
And so,
In fact, he's actually probably representative of their project more than anyone else, because he is somebody who is actually pushing that. When I say that's sort of like a white nationalist agenda that he's pushing on that television show, that benefits the working class. That he's appealing. I mean, not the working class, the ruling class.
I know what you mean.
He's carving up. He is literally taking the deepest divisions within the working class, and he's picking at them like a scab, and that's a problem. And it benefits the ruling class to. You can't even calculate that extent.
Aaron and I were talking about this the other night, where an example of how it was found out that the guy who owns SoulCycle and Equinox, all the money, he's not all the money. He's taking a lot of money and giving it to the Trump campaign. And so you had all these you had Karens canceling their SoulCycle. And Aaron's like, well, what good does that do? And don't get in here. Don't let me put words in your mouth. But I said, let him do it. Don't get in the way of that. Let him be useful. Let him, if it brings a couple of people over to leftist thought or moves the needle in any direction.
If it materially harms them in even a little bit. I mean,
right.
Okay.
I don't care. Again, I look at it all as a big propaganda war. And we are over here cutting our own legs off, cutting off people who are potentially allies because they don't use the right pronouns. Where the right is just yes, we'll use this guy on YouTube to get to this guy on Fox to get this guy in the White House, and we have no problem doing it. If anything, we should be taking that same example and doing the same thing.
I mean, there's certain things to that degree. There's definitely been a mindset and leftist thought. It's let's just do the things that Republicans do, but and that'll be effective against them. But that's kind of a trap in a lot of ways.
I don't know if it's possible in a lot of ways too. Simply because in order for a left project to come together, you're going to have to organize the entire working class across identities, and the only way that can happen is if the core sort of class consciousness that essentially it can only happen in the presence of class consciousness, because in its absence all the other things are just staring you right there in the face. So in using the language of class consciousness, it's hey, person in the classroom next to me, why don't you get class conscious? That doesn't really work. You can't just say or teach it to somebody. You need to sort of tell them or explain to them what you're doing, and you're doing it in terms of advocating for yourself and advocating for the kind of work that you're doing. So, for example, when I talk about supporting like Bernie Sanders or whatever, I specifically will say, well, if we get, I am paying so much money to my doctor and my insurance company in copays. If Medicare for All gets put in, I'm going to save a lot of money. So you're making very real, direct, material cases to people for why you're doing something, and people could take a cue from that.
So my problem, it's not that I'm, people should do what they feel like is right. That's
Totally.
But my problem with these kind of more performative things is that there's something happening all the time. So people's interest gets, lost. Very few people who are currently boycotting SoulCycle are going to continue to boycott SoulCycle because, and I say this as, count yourself lucky.
It's like a spinning class, basically.
It
I feel
is
worse
just
now that I know.
straight, like masochism is like set to trap music. It's not the best. But it's this idea that like I said, these women are probably not going to continue their boycott. And secondly, now they can tell themselves they're doing something and still
Instead of doing something.
doing all of the problematic things, that actually matter. So it brings me, I think, about the Women's March. I went to the first Women's March and I did not go to the second Women's March. And the reason was because I was like, these have been problems. The problems that we're discussing right now have been problems for a long time, since the history of the United States and before. And they did not come with Trump. But it's this idea that, once Trump is out of the office, everything's going to be fine. Mm-hmm. There was one woman who had a sign that said, if Hillary had won, we'd all be at brunch. Mm-hmm. And it's like, okay, but, my clients are not materially better or worse under Trump, to be honest. Like, they have not, a continued Trump presidency is going to get a lot worse. But currently, it's not like they were, like, living the life under Obama or living the life under Bill Clinton, And it's this idea that, just because you did this thing, you no longer have to engage or have to come to terms with your own culpability in some of society's problems. Like, we've talked about this before, but I, for a very long time, felt like my female identity, I'm a very strong feminist, gave me a pass on other stuff. And that's absolutely not the case. And that was a hard conversation to have with myself. And I only was able to have that because I didn't have this pressure release of I'm recycling, so I don't have to worry about corporate environmental policy or anything like that. Yes, individual actions matter, and do what you feel like you need to do to live your life and be okay with yourself. But
Whatever
know
helps
that
you sleep at night, honey.
Yeah, but honestly, some of these people should not be sleeping at night. They have a lot more to come to terms with, and a SoulCycle boycott for the next month and a half is not going to do it.
That's like Pete Buttigieg working at McKinsey.
No, and that's 100% right. That's 100% right, Aaron. And it's our job to say, okay, so you feel bad about this. Let's now have a conversation, because now those people are open to that. And not all of them, but if we can get 10% of them and be like, hey, Karen, you know what you should do with your extra SoulCycle time? Like, come to a DSA meeting or whatever. I'm just picking something out of the hat. But yeah, you now have an audience that's open. Like you said, the Women's March. Yeah, it's performative. And I don't like those things either, except for at the end, if you're at a good march or protest or something like that, then a good one will always have a call to action to take that energy and move it on to something else. And it's just that
and it's not just vote Democrat.
Right. And just what you were saying before, Jeff, it was when you're talking about Bernie, that's the example of in my little weird circles of exactly what I'm talking about, is that I have people who are on the left and they're like, well, Bernie Sanders is canceled because he's not a real socialist, because he's a reformer and this and that, and he still wants police. He's not ACAB and doesn't want to abolish. And I just go, shut up. I want to blow my brains out.
He's not sufficiently anti-borders. He doesn't he's not for the abolition of borders while he's running for president of the United States. Dude. So he's actually, and I'm sort of I'm actually for the abolition of borders too. That's why Bernie Sanders is a suitable compromise. That's why
he's the step. It's not even as a compromise. He is the step to get you what you want. You
have to remember, compromise is obviously the only way to get things done, but you have to make sure you're not doing more harm than good. Mm-hmm. And I say that, totally. Taking the Women's March specifically, yes, okay, it's performative, whatever. But it did actual harm to actual marginalized groups. They completely excluded sex workers. They actively
Ooh, I didn't know
excluded sex workers. There was just a lot of marginalization of people who are already marginalized. So now, sex workers who are, often women of color, often trans people of color, all of these marginalized groups, economically disadvantaged people, people, with disabilities. There's sex workers is like really
It's a broad category.
Yeah, it encompasses a lot of different marginalized groups were actively excluded. And so now these people are looking at kind of the modern feminist movement, which should be for them. And, if you're doing it right, is. And they see, oh, I'm not welcome here. Oh, these people are not my allies. Oh, they don't care about my plight. And so it's this idea that, okay, yeah, what did we accomplish by the Women's March? Yeah, maybe some people got more involved, but was it more that so we could all rest a little easier at night? So when the history books look back, we can say, oh, at least I wasn't a Nazi. I marched. I marched against this.
I think the Women's March in a lot of ways was good, but not for the reasons people think. Like, a lot of the groups, kind of like satelliting around, they kind of like it's kind of like the entrance, like walking through the doorway, You walk in and you see all this, like, big show of support for all this stuff, but there are, like, other people, like, the groups that, like, table there and stuff and, like go around, and that's how you start getting into things. Like, marches are good for, like, collections of people with the right the right similar mindsets, and like you'll see groups that are always like you could sign up for things and like get your foot in the door.
Sure, but you just have like that is all true. Like marches aren't inherently bad, but you have to make sure you're doing them correctly.
People acted like when they went there, the government was just going to
We did it. We fixed the stuff.
They acted like the government would just be like, "Wow, man, you're right. Here are the keys to the White House. Y'all won."
Yeah. Oh,
I
Trump's not
surrender and
sexist
lay down
anymore.
my office.
Yeah.
He suddenly respects women and definitely didn't make any mistresses have abortions.
My thing is that we might, like, Aaron, we might be talking about two different things, or we might be talking about the exact same thing. What I mean by that is, like, what you just described about the Women's March being so exclusionary to trans women and sex workers. I knew about the trans women. I didn't know about the sex workers. That is cancel culture. Like, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
That's, like, the ridiculousness of, like, performative... I won't even say, like you said, Jeff, I won't even say left. Like, I'll say liberal. Like, that's performative
Definitely liberal. I mean,
garbage.
so, for another example, Linda Sarsour was supposed to be kind of very involved. And
She was one of the original organizers of it, and then there was some kind of, like, she got, purged from the leadership of it. And for those of you who don't know, Linda Sarsour is, really quick, you're listening to WHIVLP New Orleans, 102.3. You can also listen online, WHIVFM.com. WHIV.org/listen. Anyway, so who's Linda Sarsour?
she is a very prominent Muslim American woman.
Palestinian activist. She's a DSA member, actually. She spoke at the DSA convention.
She's great. She's written a lot. She constantly has op-eds out there. And she was kind of forced to step down from the Women's March specifically because of her, not anti-Israel, but her...
She's a Palestinian activist, and she was the same thing that was being done to Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar had been done to Linda Sarsour as in terms of just claiming that she is being anti-Semitic based on her positions advocating for Palestinian rights, and Palestine is like an open air prison.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's that, like we were saying before, it's that language. It's that language of inclusivity being used as a weapon, because it's this idea, we want to make sure that our Jewish sisters feel comfortable here, so we're going to exclude this very prominent Muslim American person. And it's this idea. It's like
anti-Zionism is conflated with anti-Semitism.
Yeah, and I am a proud and out feminist, but it's one thing that makes me very, very angry at a lot of other women who consider themselves feminists, because these are things you can't just choose. It's not just your gender identity; it is all of your identities, and we need to be supportive of all of them in the ways we can. And so, as a feminist, we should be talking more about the treatment of Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib. This is ridiculous, and the fact that kind of more prominent feminists are not talking about it is literally absurd.
Well, more prominent feminists in the mainstream culture, there's been a lot of books written about,
Oh yeah.
About sort of more left or more like broadly inclusive class-based feminism, socialist feminism, and things like that, which I am no expert on, by the way.
I'm definitely not talking about like leftist. I'm talking about liberals specifically. But I think a lot of times those terms get conflated very frequently to people who aren't as informed about politics.
Yeah, we should definitely do perhaps maybe this could be like an extra bonus sort of thing where we sort of split that distinction and really dig down into what is the difference between left and liberal in a sort of deep way, because that's something that will take sort of a lot of time and nuance to sort of drive down into.
Yeah,
so stay tuned for that. We can sort of like have that coming down the pipe somewhere.
Yeah, we've got about 5 minutes left. I really wanted to, and I think this is a good segue for the second hour, which will be released on Thursday, really talk about Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, how they're being banned from visiting Israel.
They were canceled from Israel.
Yeah, so we'll talk about that in the second hour, but because it's all like intersectional. What is the DSA voted on a resolution for BDS? What was that resolution? Because I just brought it up that I think as DSA
that was
members,
2 years ago, actually.
Oh no, that was 2 years.
Yeah, that was the previous convention that there was a official vote. I don't know if they redid it at this convention.
Okay, so I'm reading this. This is right off the BDS website. I keep wanting to say BDS
boycott, divestment, and sanction. It's a campaign to essentially not purchase or use or divest from products and organizations that are based or have operations in occupied Palestinian land.
For instance, I really want a SodaStream real bad, and I don't have a SodaStream because
we're bleeping that word out.
Can't do it.
I'm kidding.
But so as of August 3rd, the convention, and be it resolved that the Democratic Socialists of America establish a national working group dedicated to BDS and Palestinian solidarity.
Mm-hmm. So that's an advance on the previous years where they had been there was an official statement in 2017 where the DSA sort of like made an official stance, but didn't make any material steps in terms of support for the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. But now, apparently, they have created a working group, which, go on, Robert, I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
You were reading from the resolution.
Yeah, I'm just reading right from the resolution. Be it resolved that the National will allow autonomous leadership and membership of said working group. Be it resolved that the National will reaffirm BDS and Palestine solidarity as a priority for the national organization and further commit itself to organizing in solidarity with the BDS movement, which urges nonviolent pressure on Israel until it meets 3 demands: ending its occupation and colonization of all Arab lands and dismantling the wall, recognizing the fundamental rights of Arab Palestinian citizens of Israel to full equality, and respecting, protecting, and promoting the rights of Palestinian refugees to return to their homes and properties as stipulated in the UN Resolution 194. Whereas the Democratic Socialists of America endorsed the boycott, divestment, and sanctions (BDS) movement at its 2017 convention.
So that must again. I don't want to speak out of hand, but I'm fairly certain that must have taken place on the consent agenda, which is the where they just sort of don't even have to debate these things. It just kind of passes through by acclamation. But I could be wrong about that. But anyway, they reaffirmed it. Then they specifically articulated, equal rights. I get that. Palestinian right to return, so refugees can come back if they've had to flee because of colonizers coming in, settlers coming in and occupying their land. They're kind of cast out. There's now an opportunity to come back. So this is all. That's good stuff as far as I'm concerned, at least. If you want to call us anti-Semitic, go ahead and do so in an email at contact@goodmorningcomrade.com.
I mean, I really want to dig into this in the second hour, but just as I guess we'll tease the Thursday show. It's that, okay, so with, Congresswoman Tlaib and Congresswoman Omar being banned from Israel, and especially with Omar having family in Palestine.
Tlaib.
Yeah. Oh, it's Tlaib. I'm sorry. My
Million Omar's
apologies.
from Sudan.
Yes,
Yes.
correct. That's correct. It's absurd, and what we should really do is be putting right wing people who, like, let's say your average Fox News viewer in kind of a predicament of, what do we always hear? Well, you don't have to like the president, but you got to respect the office. Like at some point, like these are legislators, and you have to respect their office. And the idea that you're going to get so mad because they're saying that people shouldn't buy things, and that's why you're denying them visas into the country, or just it's absurd. We wouldn't, as America, this would not stand from any other country in the United States. And even AIPAC has come out against it because they're like they know.
What's AIPAC?
AIPAC is the lobbyist group for Israel in America.
It's all about the Benjamins.
And they funnel a bunch of money to different campaigns of people who are pro right wing Israeli government. And I very carefully use the word pro right wing Israeli government and not pro Israel, because that's what it is. But this would not stand. There would be, could you imagine if Fox News, what Fox News would say if Donald Trump was denied access to Sudan, Australia, I mean, anywhere, it would be absurd. Or Steve King or anybody like that, they'd be 24-hour, at least it would dominate the news cycle for that day.
And then 5 minutes later, he would say something stupid, and that would dominate the next news cycle.
Never wanted to go to Australia anyway.
No.
So I'm excited to delve into this in the next hour, but I've been dying to share this anecdote since Tucker Carlson came up, but I didn't want to derail an otherwise good conversation. But my friend used to work for the Daily Caller. She is not conservative. It was just she ended up getting a job there.
You got to make money somehow.
They were trying to do a BuzzFeed type listicle situation. So she would just write 10 angry cats that are mad about socialism or whatever. But he apparently used to sit in his office and watch all of his TV interviews and appearances and gas himself up. He would sit in there and be like, yes, that is why they pay me the big bucks. That's how you do it, Tucker. Just all day, every day. And she used to G-chat me while he was doing it. And now every time I see him, I just picture his dumb bow tie.
Spinning.
Just being really into himself.
I was watching this documentary about A-Rod, and apparently, no matter what time of day you went to his house, he just had clips of A-Rod on all the time.
Yeah. A-Rod did it better. Anyway, you can listen to us every Tuesday morning at 8 o'clock on WHIVLP New Orleans 102.3. You can also listen to us anywhere in the world, WHIVFM.org/listen. Check us out on Facebook, Good Morning Comrade, Twitter @Comrade Morning, Instagram, all the stuff. Bye. Love you.